Okay, so um, this is for split channel CMYK printing. Um, so normal CMYK printing, you would just print 4 layers, and you would separate a full color image into 4 film positives and 4 layers. Split channels is a more advanced possibility where instead of 4 layers, you would print 8. Now you're still dealing with cyan, magenta, yellow, black, but you are going to mix 2 versions of each of those. And the different versions are about saturation, and we call that high and low. So of your 8 layers, you're going to have a high magenta and a low magenta. The high is more saturated. The low is very desaturated. You'd have a high yellow and a low yellow, a high cyan, a low cyan, a high black, and a low black. The high is always the more saturated one, and the low is always the less saturated one. And in fact, to say less is probably a little deceiving because really the low is so desaturated that it's really, really subtle. Now the reason you might want to do split channel CMYK is because the nature of normal CMYK is that, so when you have only a faint amount of a certain color, the computer is going to translate that faint amount by putting very tiny dots into that area. And what happens is the dots get so small that the screen can't hold them, and they disappear. For your screen print, what that means is that you end up with an image that is a little more garish than what you started out with because you've lost your lightest, least saturated values in the image. So split channels is a way of bringing that back. Essentially what split channels does is you take those really desaturated areas. I could point to some of the parts of this image like this right in here, this really light. There's a little bit of color there. That is not the same white as the margin, or this really light green right there. So everywhere inside this form, there is at least a tiny bit of color. But where it's very desaturated and faint, that's where it would be more likely to just disappear in the screen print and effectively render these portions of the image exactly like the margin, because it would be pure paper showing through and we wouldn't have any small quantities of dots of color in there. And so we would have lost our lightest values. So what we're going to do is split channels. We're going to effectively push up the, 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 the saturation level of these really faint areas so that the computer will translate them with a bigger dot. That bigger dot will be held in the screen and transferred to the screen print, but we're going to print those bigger dots with that low ink that is so desaturated that it's barely there. So we're going to digitally pump up our lighter values, make separate film positives for those, but then we're going to print those in this low version of the process colors that will be super faint. And so 8-layer split channel CMYK is going to give you a much softer image. It's going to give you something much more accurate to what you see on screen right now. But it's the trouble of printing 8 layers instead of 4. So you weigh the pros and cons. So the first thing you want to do is before you split channels, you want to make sure everything about this image is what you want. So you want to make sure you're in the right image mode, so you're right now the default, it's RGB. We are going to need this to be in CMYK because that's the ultimate type of printing we're doing. That's what, this is not going to live as a digital image on a computer screen or online, so it's going to be a screen print. So we switch to CMYK color. And we check the image size to make sure that it is indeed the size we want. If we wanted to make any changes at this point, like changing contrast or saturation level, so you do whatever changes you want to make the image look the way you want it to look. Now, once all those changes are done, you definitely want to make sure you're on the right image mode and the right image size. But once all those changes are done, you're ready to do the split channel. And if you come over here to the layers palette and switch over to channels right there, channels in a Photoshop file are channels of color, and you can see because we changed this image mode to CMYK, our channels are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So now we're already kind of ready to shift this image into CMYK printing. And you have this actually it's 4 little horizontal lines in the corner of that menu button. So click that, and you see this choice right here, split channels. Now, as soon as I click on split channels, what it's going to do is it's going to take this single color image and it's going to separate it into 4 grayscale files. Each grayscale file is going to correspond to 1 channel. Because notice this first channel is all of them. I could turn that off. I could turn some of these off. So I could see that's just the black right there, right? That's just the yellow. And notice that when I only have 1, it shows it as black. The computer, programmers did that so that you see it. Because if it's just the yellow, it's hard to see the yellow. And they assume that if you're turning off all the channels but 1, what you really want to see is the quantity of information of that color, and that's just easier to see with black. Same thing with those. If I have 2 on, they switch back to color. So that's just with the yellow and the magenta channels. Totally fascinating always. There's just the magenta and the cyan. But if you do want to see all of them, you just click on that one at the top. So we have 4 channels here, because this is just all of them. And so we've set our, oh, you can't see it because it's outside of the recording area, but you get a drop-down, when you click on this, you get a drop-down menu. It's right here, and it says Split Channels. And you can see the blue where I'm sort of choosing. I'm going to choose Split Channels, and immediately you see I now have 4 grayscales, and it automatically labels them. So you can see here, black. This is the name of the file underscore black, name of the file underscore yellow, name of the file underscore magenta, name of the file underscore cyan. And because it's showing us the quantity in black for each of these, and they are all image mode, they are all grayscale files now. So they have now no color information, but they are representations of a specific color. Now, if I wanted to, I could just apply a halftone to each of these 4 grayscale files, probably via bitmap or through the RIP software program that we have in our computer room in printmaking. Either one of those could apply a halftone dot, and that would be like normal 4-layer CMYK printing. But as I mentioned, you can see like in this cyan, there's a very small quantity of cyan up here. You see how there's really trace amounts of cyan in some of these spots. Those really light quantities of cyan are going to be translated into a halftone of very small dots. And some of those dots will be too small for my screen to hold, and I will lose them. So if I want to make sure that even this lightest little bits of color gets into my screen print, that's when I want to do the split channels, or the 8-layer split channels. So what do I do next? I take each of these and I go, you can't, it's outside of the recording area, but I'm clicking on image. So you go image, mode, and from bitmap you go to duotone. So I click on duotone. I'm starting with the cyan right here. Instead of monotone, which is just the 1 layer, I'm going to switch it to duotone. I'm going to change this to black. So you can see how I've got the circle all the way down in the bottom left corner. Both are black. That's fine. At this point, I have to understand that what I'm seeing on my computer screen is not really very indicative of anything I'm going to see in my screen print. I just kind of have to know what I'm doing and also trust. And it's these two curves of the duotone that are critical. We're going to go ahead and label these right off the bat. So we're going to label the top one high black. That's going to be our darker black. And we're going to label this one as our low black. That's going to be our really, really light desaturated black. Now, I've already got this now set up as a duotone, and I can just click OK. But I need to mess with these curves so that each of these two is going to be printing the appropriate information out of the image. For the high, it's pretty simple. So click on this little line right there, this ideogram. Not ideogram, sorry, histogram. I'm not sure why I said ideogram. And here we have a graph representation of grayscale information of the image. For the high, you want kind of a classic S-curve. So notice the scale here. It's the white on the left. So bottom left is white, top right is black. And by moving this line, I'm telling Photoshop that I want to, like if I click right there and drag up, what I'm saying is I want these dark grays to get darker. And you see that change. I can undo by clicking, well, I can also just come over here. I can highlight that and just delete it, and that point that I placed in that line disappears. You can also re-click on it and press delete. But what I want to do is I want to take my dark grays and go a little bit darker, and I want to do something reverse down here. I want to take the lighter grays, so I click in the vicinity on the line right around in here, and I drag this down. So I'm taking my light grays and I'm making them lighter. And I'm taking my dark grays and making them darker. So all I'm doing with this curve is, on the high, is I'm increasing the contrast. And so you do this classic kind of S-curve to increase the contrast. And then that one's done. That's the high. Here's the low. And the low is more critical. Now the low is really, the high layer of your screen print is going to carry most of the information. Expressed as a percentage, I would say it's about 85% of the image. So 85% of what you want to see in your screen print is going to be from the high layer. And that's why the high is the more saturated layer of the color. The low is really only responsible for the lightest 15 to 20% of the image. So a very small quantity of the image, but by our estimation, critical. So for that, for this low, I'm only interested in this first 15 to 20% of this line in the lower left. Everything past about this point on up is going to be taken care of by the high. The low is only responsible for these lightest values right down in here. So what I need to do is I need to take those really light grays and I need to make them much darker so that the computer translates them as a bigger dot. So I click right about there and I drag up, opposite what I did on the other one. And I'm going to bring it up pretty precipitous. So, and you can see everything's gotten much darker. But I'm also going to click right on the very tip of the line, that last dot, and just bring it all the way down. Not only that, I'm going to click about right here, so somewhere in this vicinity, and drag it and just flatline it, like that. Now, obviously, the image looks very peculiar at this point, but remember, this is the low, and all I'm worried about is this first 15 to 20% of the values in the lighter range. And I only need to make those lighter values darker. That's it. So that's my curve for the low. Now there's other possibilities. I could, instead of flatlining it, I could just like have it like this or something. But the high is going to take care of the most of that information. So I might as well just bottom this out. like that. Now, having set the curves for, oh, you know what? I just caught a mistake I made. So we're currently on the cyan layer, and I had labeled these black. I need to change that to cyan. Great. So having set those two curves for the cyan, I can click OK. This image is still now a duotone, and it has both the high and the low programmed into them with the curves. Now I can go to the magenta and do the same. So image, mode, duotone. And here's the great thing about Photoshop is that it remembers these curves as the last that anybody did, which is the one I just did on cyan. If somebody else was working on the computer and doing something else with duotone and curves, then it would be different, and you'd have to reset these. But you only have to do it once. So you do it on the first one, and then all the other three are automatically going to have the exact same curves. And you can use the same. All we need to do is change this name. So this needs to go to magenta, and this needs to go to magenta. And it's important to name these properly because it's gonna put these names on the next step. And if I don't remember to do the names correctly, it's going to be really easy for me to get them mixed up. So now the magenta's done. So once I set the first one, each other one is really easy. Here's the yellow, image, mode, duotone. Curves are already set. I need to change the name to yellow, yellow, and my black. You can see that in CMYK printing, black is often the layer that will have the least information. Image, mode, duotone. There's my two curves. I need to change the name. So now I've got 4 Greyscale duotones, each with a high and a low programmed in with the appropriate names and with the right curve set on each. So now I can go back to the cyan, and I come over here to let's see, there's one more step here that I almost always forget. And so let's go to image mode, index color. And so this is actually important because it won't, no, I'm sorry, let's do multi-channel. Yeah, multi-channel. So now we choose multi-channel because if we stay on image mode duotone right there, then it won't let us do the split channels. You can't see it, it's outside the recording range, but my option for split channels right here is grayed out. I cannot split channels from duotone. So instead, I have to go image, mode, multi-channel. So I hit multi-channel. Now you see on the channels palette, I've got 2 channels. And now I can split this. And this is where it's critical that you name these. So now I go that drop-down menu, I do split channels again, and it gives me 2 more grayscales. So here you see low cyan and high cyan. I no longer have the grayscale of just the duotone of cyan. All I have now is 2 grayscales, one for the high and one for the low. I got to do the same thing with the magenta. Image, mode, multi-channel, split channels. There they are, and I come and I do the same thing with the yellow, image, mode, multi-channel, split channels. And finally, the black, image, mode, multi-channel, split channels. So now I have 8 grayscale files, and each one is the specific. So here is my high black. So as the high black, this is going to be the darker black. You can see there's very little information there. In CMYK printing, the black is really just to push the shadows over the edge. Just push them barely so they're nice and dark. You don't need a ton of it. Now, this is the low black. So you might think, well, the low is less saturated. It's lighter. So why are we seeing more information here? Because of the curve that I placed on the low, I needed those light grays to be darker so that I get a dot big enough that my screen can hold. So yes, the low is darker than the high as a film positive, but when I go to screen print the low, I'm going to screen print a transparent gray that is just gently different than the paper. Whereas the high black will be a much darker gray. Same thing with the low yellow. Here's the low yellow. You can see that the digital file actually, the margin is not white. There's actually color in there. This is the low yellow, and so and you might think, well, there's a whole bunch of yellow up here in the image. Where did that go? Well, I flatlined the curve for the low. Look at the high yellow. The high yellow has solid black up here because I need so much yellow up here. In this one, the low is not responsible for that portion of the image. The low is responsible for just the lightest range of the yellows. So the low picks up where the high leaves off. The low magenta, there's quite a bit of magenta information out there as well, and the high magenta. The high is always going to look closer to what the image started looking like, and the low is always going to look real weird. There's the low cyan. Move that over. And last one, the high cyan. So at this point, I need to take each of these 8 grayscale files and I need to apply a halftone to them. And in our shop, we have 2 ways that you can do that. There's one way where you can see the halftone on screen, and that's bitmap. And the other way, which is probably the better way, is to use our RIP software program and our Epson inkjet printer. And that way is a better translation of the color and value range than bitmap is, but it has the downside that you cannot see it on screen. So you will not see, with the RIP software, you will not see the dot, the halftone, on your computer screen. It'll look just like it does now, but think of it as a translation between the computer and the printer. That's what the RIP software is. And so it's going to be applying the dot to your image and translating your tones into a halftone for you, and then putting that halftone onto the film positive. But if, for the sake of this demo, if I'm going to use bitmap, so I come up to the top to image mode, because I'm currently in Greyscale, bitmap is an option. I can only go to bitmap from Greyscale, but I'm currently there, so I can choose bitmap. I get this little window right here. Now I'm coming in at 300 pixels per inch. I need to up that to 600 so that I get true curves and not too much stair stepping. And instead of diffusion dither, I'd want to choose halftone screen. Then I hit OK. And because I chose halftone screen, I get this dialog box. And here I can specify what LPI or DPI I want. And remember, LPI and DPI are the same, but both are very different from PPI, which is pixels per inch. Pixels is about how the computer remembers the image. LPI or DPI, which are the same, are about ink on paper or ink on film positive. So if you're using kind of our shop standard, the 195 white mesh, then 35 DPI is probably the highest you should go. Now here, you have to understand the angles and what angles are proper um, for screen printing to avoid moire. I'm going to do a quick Cmyk Angles Google search, and I'll show you this here. Hopefully you're seeing it. There are lots of different angles you can use. The trick is don't mix your systems. So this would be one, and there's lots of different ones. So 75 for the magenta, 45 for the black, 15 for the cyan, and 0 for the yellow. Let's just go ahead and use that. If you're working in our shop, know that in our black notebook on the shelf above the computers is written down the angles that we use, and it tends to be this one, I think, actually. No, because we use 45 for black. Yeah, so I'm going to stick to that one. There's different sets of angles that can be used, but I can't just like choose the magenta angle from this system and a different angle for the cyan from over here. I need to, like these 4 angles right here are made to work together to avoid moire. So let's say 75 degrees for the magenta, 45 for the black, 15 for the cyan, and 0 for the yellow. So I'm going to move those. And this, right now, I am doing my cyan. So I'm going to set that at 35, and the angle is going to be 15 for cyan. Now, because I'm trying to maximize detail, I want to choose ellipse, and I hit OK. And there is my halftone. If I zoom in, you see what's going on there. If I really zoom in, you can see why I raised the PPI to 600. Now we're seeing stair-stepping here, but that's because I've zoomed in so much. By the time this is a screen print, if I did 600 pixels per inch, when this is life size, you will not see the stair-stepping. Now this is not a big image. This is like just a few inches tall, according to Photoshop. So when I said 35 dpi, that makes it seem like it's a fairly big dot. But the actual size of the image is closer to that right there. And then I have to do that to each one. So that's my high cyan. Now I go to the low cyan, and I go image, mode, bitmap. I want to go from 300 to 600 ppi, choosing halftone screen. 35, I'm going to leave it at 15. It's remembering what I did last time. I leave it at ellipse. There is my low cyan. So notice that, again, the high has greater range and contrast. The low has more information, and that can be counterintuitive. But that's because we darkened those light grays so that the dot would be big enough. So this dot is not going to have any trouble being held in my screen. But right now we're seeing those dots as true black, whereas when we screen print them, we will be printing them with a transparent gray that is barely different from the paper. And I do the same thing to all of these. So image, mode, bitmap, 300 to 600 halftone screen, click OK, 35 dpi, but the angle of the magenta is different. We're going to use 75, and we leave that on ellipse. Same thing with the low magenta, image, mode, bitmap, OK, 75, that's our low magenta. Now the yellow is image, mode, bitmap, 35, and our angle for yellow is 0. Image, mode, bitmap. And finally, our blacks are going to be at 45-degree angle. Now I have all 4 colors, each color split into 2 layers, 2 channels, high and low, and I can now print my film positives. Again, if you're printing these film positives in our shop, we have 2 options. Option 1, do what I just did via bitmap. Option 2, you will not see the halftone on your computer screen, but use the RIP software program that's connected to the Epson. And there was a separate video for how to use that. And the only disadvantage to that is that you do not see the halftone on the screen, but it actually gives you a better tonal and color translation of your original photograph. So given the 2 choices, I would say, unless you have a reason to do the bitmap, I would do the RIP software. The last thing, of course, is as you print, you would need to add crosshairs, because printing Cmyk 4-layer, you really need the crosshairs. Printing Cmyk split channel 8-layer, you really absolutely need them. You not only need the crosshairs, so I'm doing File and Print, so that I'm not actually going to print these as part of this video, but I want you to see the print dialog box. So right now, this computer that I'm making this demo from is connected to a laser printer. So this interface will look a little bit different when you're printing on the Epson, but not that much. What you're looking for is you're scrolling down, you're looking for printing marks, so I'm going to open that up. I want registration marks. You see in the preview that I get them all. And I want description and labels. Each of these is titled correctly. If I click description and labels, it's going to put that title on there. If I neglect to do this, I guarantee you, you will mix up your low yellow with your low cyan or whatever. And when you're done screen printing, you're going to be like, why does my color look so weird? It's because you mixed up your film positives and your colors. So the titling is kind of critical. Don't forget to add these things. So, and there's no way you're going to get this in good registration. It won't work the way you want it to unless you're registering each layer with registration marks. So those 3 really need to be clicked, and then you would hit print. I would add these 3 to each one of these 8 files, and I would send it to the printer. Now, I could also make these film positives on our laser printer using our vellum or specially prepared Mylar. But if you want the best quality film positive for your exposure to your screen, then the Epson is the way to go. The RIP software program is only connected to the Epson. So if you are printing on the laser printer for cheaper, lower quality film positives, then you have to use the bitmap option that I've just shown you. Only on the computer that's connected to the Epson do you have the option of using the RIP software program. I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.